Alright, so I've had more than a few questions about the construction method of this airplane, and so I just wanted to cover a quick assembly of this plane so that you guys can understand what the build sequence is and how things go together. It's a little bit easier to see it than whenever I explain something that's totally new. So the biggest thing is you have to come up with 3 parts, and I think the leading edge is pretty straightforward. It builds flat on the bench as you see it here, a couple of clamps on either side to make sure that it's true and straight. There's a video blog that covers the wrapping with the paper. So this is the first assembly that you have to master. You have to get the leading edge built true and straight. Second, very simple, I think, and straightforward, is the center section. The center section is 3 main pieces, the main center section part and 2 doublers in the front. Clamp those together. There is a key that's generally designed to keep the surfaces true, and there is an optional balsa wood filler. On planes that I think are a little more stable, I'll use the balsa wood filler just to give it some extra weight to the back, but not so much as having it solid basswood. So very simple, part number 2. And then part number 3, which is the one where I seem to lose most people, is the trailing edge wingtip assembly. The trailing edge wingtip assembly builds flat on the bench just as you see it here. So the first thing I'll do is I'll trim my 1 carbon rod into 2 carbon rods, aka I'll cut it in half in the middle, and then using black CA I'll join it to this trailing edge joiner piece. If you're building the traditional trailing edge plane, you'll use this joiner and you'll join the carbon into this joiner straight out both sides. I recommend in the instructions heavily reinforcing this piece. This is more of a core blank to help give you all the correct angles, but this piece alone is not strong enough. You do need to laminate this with carbon or fiberglass or some sort of reinforcement. A couple guys have used 64th plywood, but it is necessary to reinforce this, otherwise that part will fail. So once you've got the trailing edge glued to the trailing edge joiner, then you'll glue the wingtips on. So this part, as you can see, is fully assembled. The wingtips are glued to the carbon trailing edge, and the carbon trailing edge is joined at the center. So this is the piece that I'm referring to when I refer to the trailing edge assembly. These 5 parts glue together flat on the bench, and that gives you assurance that you don't have any twist in the wingtips. Once that's done, the final assembly of the plane, and I'm going to do it dry as so that you can see the assembly without having to make a big mess with the glue, is to simply apply glue to the center section on both sides where it will interface with the leading edge. Slide the leading edge into, the center section glues into the leading edge. Okay, just like this. So now this part is located in the leading edge. It can only go in one place. It's locked in place by the 3 spars and by being captured in the center section. Secondly, I glue the wingtips, or rather the wingtip ribs, to the wingtips on both sides. And I do that with CA glue. And once that's done, I apply glue at the center section and at the end of both wingtips here. And the final assembly is just that simple. The wingtips slot into the leading edge in their one and only location. The 3 spars capture the tip rib. So this whole piece is locked in place both in all directions. So once it's glued in, now this is how the airplane assembles true and straight without a jig. Once you've achieved this, you should have a straight plane, and now it's just up to you to continue building it without building in warps. I'll go after this and insert the ribs Again, you'll be doing this with glue, so it will take you slightly more time. The beauty of doing it without glue is, of course, when you put it in backwards, you can put it back in correctly. Notice that the gussets have a fair gap to the trailing edge, if you can see that in the video. That's intentional. And the idea is that once the ribs are glued in place, you can then go back with CA on the back of the gusset, bring the gusset back to meet the trailing edge, so you have basically a movable joint. Once the trailing edge is glued to the gusset and the rib is glued to the leading edge, then you can come back afterwards with CA and glue the gusset to the rib, and you've got a plane that's constructed with no load on the airframe. If you constrain this airplane into a jig, you can bind crooked or misaligned parts into a straight jig and come out of the jig with a straight airplane, which has all kinds of internal loads. As soon as that airplane's popped on the ground, popped in the air, or the covering gets hot in an airplane bag or out sitting at the sun at the field, that airplane will develop warps and so forth. And also by having a pre-stressed airframe that's not properly stressed, it's more prone to breaking. So there you go, that's the construction process. This airplane was just built. Of course, if I would have used glue, it'd be fully assembled. And it was all done without a jig, and the procedures and the interlocking parts allow it to be a true straight flying airplane straight off the bench with no jig. If you guys have any questions, post your comments below in the blog.